So I thought tonight, in light of the events of the last couple of weeks and some of the things I've heard from people either reaching out to me or in other venues about people's reaction to how things went with the election, I thought I would talk about for a little time tonight how we can work with this in our practice. And again, just what you're all doing is it's amazing that it's already happening. It shows the power of our meditation practice, that it arises for us when we need it. It feels sometimes like it won't be there, but when times get challenging, it arises for us. So I thought what I would talk a little bit about, this is based on a talk that I did a few weeks before the election, when people were stressed, but a different kind of stress in a way, right? Like some of it was anticipation. I think the common thing that happens for us with stress, though, two big factors are fear and uncertainty. And those go hand in hand. So we're afraid of what could happen. One of the things about fear that's worth noting is fear is always about the future. It's not about this moment. So with that comes uncertainty. Fear's nature is that we feel like we need to be afraid of something, but it's the fear itself which is the problem, not what we're afraid of. In most cases, we can't even put into accurate language what it is that we're afraid of. It's very nebulous and very uncertain. So that combination of the fear and then the uncertainty, which in turn actually tends to promote more of the fear, is at the root of a lot of the stress and suffering that we feel during these times. And when we have a practice, it is wonderful to be able to see that our practice is right there to support us. But I want to talk a little bit about what goes on within us when fear and uncertainty arise, and the anatomy of the foundations of stress and suffering that is what our practice is helping us with. I think it's worth looking at those things for ourselves to see, how does this happen? What's going on inside me? What's actually happening that I'm needing my practice to sort of defend me from? One of the gifts of a mindfulness awareness practice is that over time, the more we investigate, the more we come to see the nature of what this mind and body do. And when we see those things clearly, the mind and body in that tightening release its hold on us, and we find ourselves free of the sources of stress and suffering, and therefore free of the stress and suffering itself. So I invite, as I share really what's my experience with this, if I invite you to see, do these things resonate for you as well? So I think one of the things that happens with fear and uncertainty is a kind of constriction in our life. Things begin to narrow in. And as they narrow in, there's a few different things that go on with that. First of all, there's a feeling of no floor, of no foundation under us. And that in turn, that feeling of uncertainty that there's no floor, is itself a fearful place to be. Fear in that sense has a combination of a physical sensation in the body, but then that also induces into the mind certain types of thoughts that come to life. And as those thoughts come to life, they further enhance that tightening of the body and the constriction of the body, and it becomes a cycle. And we find this thing feeding itself. So as the mind begins to constrict, our world begins to get smaller. And it gets smaller in two dimensions. One is in space, and the other is in time. So literally, I think as you think about your mind constricting in fear and uncertainty, this becomes in terms of space, this becomes your world, just here, just what's going on inside of me. Certainly there's things outside that are feeding the fear and the uncertainty, but the world is in here. The fear, the space is smaller. The other one is in terms of time. Time seems to constrict as well. We really move into the present moment more and more when there's fear. Now, that's kind of ironic to think that we're moving into the present moment, and yet isn't that what we're sitting and doing this for, is to come to the present moment? Why don't we just have a disaster, right? We'll find ourselves in the present moment. But there are two different kinds of being present. When there's fear and uncertainty and constriction, the present moment is very reactive, and that's all there is. We're only here now for whatever it is that's in front of us. We're not attending to it. We're absorbed by the content of the mind in that moment. So it's as if the content of the present moment is occupying us. It's who we are. It's what we are in that moment. And contrast that to presence. In presence, we're aware of the current moment, but it's put in the context of a more spacious and timeless world. So at the same time we're present to, say, a breath or something else that's going on, there's a context to a bigger thing, to our life, to the universe, to the beginning and ending and endless time. There's a sense of our place in something much bigger than this present moment. So there's a resonance that comes when we're present to this moment, to the now, but we're not absorbed by the content of it. One of the gifts of a mindfulness practice, of being present in that way, is that things are flowing through the present moment. Thoughts, feelings, things like that flow through. They're not grabbing us and holding us. Whereas if you take the present moment awareness that comes when we're grabbed in fear, that's all there is just that present moment. To be able to come outside of that is really challenging for us to do. And that's where our practice does come in, to help us to get a little more perspective on that. So that's one quality that seems to happen, or one pair of things that seems to happen, is a constriction of space and a constriction of time in our experience. I think another thing that happens is a constriction in our view. So I want to use two words, because I don't have good words for these things, but I'll pick two words. One would be values, things that we value. And that might be things like peace, connection, equanimity, balance, things of that sort. You could think of those as values. They're ways of being in life. And I call them values because they're things that we know to be our birthright. They might be hard for us to grab or hold on to at times, but we know that they are things that are foundationally of significance to us. So we have these values. Then on top of that, our minds create what I'm going to call beliefs, which are stories about our values. So if you take, for example, peace, we value peace. You valuing peace does not require any words. That's true, right? Peace is wordless. But we do layer words on top that say, I believe in peace, or I work for peace, or other things like this. And those are all good and well. The problem is, as the mind constricts with fear and uncertainty, we begin to coalesce around the belief and lose the value. So we'll use peace again as an example. So in fear and uncertainty, when we feel that peace, our ability to be at peace, is at risk, we don't retreat to the value. We don't retreat to a place of peace. We grab hold of the idea of peace and try to use that as a tool to recreate the peace or bring us close to the peace. But it can't work. It doesn't work that way. So if somebody else you feel is disrupting your peace, or is putting in place policies that will disrupt that, our belief about peace becomes a place of distance between them. It's not peace. Peace doesn't create the distance between us and those who we hold differing views with, right? Peace has room for everybody, for everything. It's our view of peace, our belief around peace, that says, if what you're saying and promoting and doing comes to be, there can be no peace. That's my belief about it. I have no knowledge if there can be peace or not. None whatsoever. So if I identify with that belief about peace, I'm building a structure which just by building that structure alienates me from the peace which is my birthright and which is what I seek for myself and the world around me. Does this make sense? It's important to know this because that constriction process, our belief about the value becomes a prison for us. It encloses us off to the world around us. How can you have peace when you're fighting for peace? Right? How can you have connection when, because somebody doesn't see the way you see, you're fighting against them for connection? So the belief part of this, and it's a tool of the mind, that constricting of the mind becomes the enemy of the very thing of what it is that we value. And friends, that's the only enemy. There are no enemies out there. The enemies arise within us because of this constriction, because of this fear and uncertainty and the ramifications in our body and mind. We create our own enemies within our mind that will do battle within that. It's not to say that everything that goes on in the world is good. I'm not saying that. But we're never getting to those things when we're doing battle in our own minds. We're never even getting to those things. We don't have the opportunity to see what is the world offering to me in this moment. The stories that the mind weaves about these things become the thing that we're identified with, not the real world. And that identification with whatever it happens to be induces more of that same thing. There's a passage from a Christian writer, C.S. Lewis, who lost his wife to cancer, and he wrote a beautiful book called A Grief Observed, and how he went through the process of losing his wife and his grief process. And I can't quote this exactly, but basically what he said is, when we take something like cancer or war or any of these big things, we never experience that thing. We don't experience cancer. We don't experience war. We don't experience the thing that we're afraid might happen in our country. All you do is experience moments. Some of those moments, he says, are good and pleasant, even in the worst of times. And some of them are sad and unpleasant, even in the best of times. And he said the thing itself that we call cancer or war is nothing more than the culmination of putting those things together. You know, I know my wife Lori and I went through this. She had lymphoma a few years ago, and we did a lot of work around there's no such thing as cancer. She had good moments. She had bad moments. She had moments where she had to take chemo treatments. She had moments where she had no hair, where she was sick to her stomach. She had all of these moments. But cancer was a story that was layered on top of it. Now, certainly we want the physicians to work with that and to know what to prescribe and everything. But it would do her no good to think, I have cancer. That feeling, I have cancer, closes and constricts. So from that perspective, to let that go, to not have that rigid belief as being identifying who she was very helpful to her. And so I say the same is true for us with these other things that come up in our lives about what we think about the world we live in, where it might be headed, what others might do. All of those things, as we build this worldview within ourselves, that's creating the prison, which is the root of our suffering. This is This process, although not seen from this perspective, is well known by the press. So they're constantly feeding that to you. So if you choose during these times to read about what's going on right now in the government and digest all that news, you can really build an incredibly big prison for yourself. So the question is, to what extent do we need to know any of that right now? For the most part, there's very little we need to really know right now, especially if it brings you any anguish. I've had, when I say that, people say, well, I need to be informed. And I ask them why, right? Why do you need to be informed? What will you do differently tomorrow if you read the news tonight than you would do if you didn't see the news tonight? What would you do differently? Certainly before the time to vote, that's something you need to do. But what will you do differently tonight if you read the news or if you don't read the news? And to think, if I do fill myself with news that's disruptive to me and disturbing to me, I might do things differently tomorrow, and they probably won't be skillful. So we can begin to see it's helpful for me to meter what I take in. Another place that this happens for many of us is we tend to be in friend groups that have similar kinds of ideas. That can be deadly, because when friends get together and talk about these things together, it can very often fuel fires that you already felt. So somebody that you care a lot about, they're fearful, you're fearful. It's not two fearfuls, it's 10 fearfuls when two people come together like that and talk about these things. So being able to recognize for yourself, is that skillful speech for me? Is that really something I need? I love the question, to what end? Why would I engage in this? And there's some part of us that feels good, if I can use that word maybe in quotes, feels satisfied somehow to beat these things with a person you care about, some sort of camaraderie or something. There's something that might feel, satisfying around that. But the long-term effect of it is not satisfying. It's to induce more of that fear within ourselves. So as we begin to see that looking for ourselves to see, does my mind constrict around these things? Do I see the world more black and white than I did before? Do I have beliefs that are caricatures of values that I truly hold? Am I using those caricatures of values to alienate myself from others or to bring harm to myself or others? In a kind of an innocent way, right? I'm not trying to do it, but it's just the nature of this mind and body. And as we begin to see this is the way this mind and body work, there's this constriction process, then we can begin to look at what's the value of the tools that we have. And depending upon what this last week and a half have been for you, sometimes it feels like it's just a life preserver that's been thrown out from your practice out to you, and you're bobbing up and down on the waves holding this practice to try to keep yourself stable and sane and at peace, right? It can feel more like a life preserver. And that's certainly a good use for it in those cases. But it can be much more than that. If we can begin to see, by looking closely to see what is really going on inside of me, what's happening inside of me, can I begin to see this nature, this constriction of the mind and possibly the body around fixed views, things that I have created in my mind, fears that I have embellished in my mind that have no foundation based on current evidence in my life today? Can I begin to see that those are the roots of my suffering? Those are the tools that induce suffering into my life. And as I begin to see that, to see what are ways that I can meet that. And the first one is to see it. One of the most powerful tools in mindfulness practice is just seeing what's going on. So to begin to see, what is the nature of my fear? Not what's my fear about, right? We've talked before that fear is not really about anything. It's looking for something to be attached to. But what is the nature of fear? And it can be very helpful to see, what does that feel like in the body? One of the good things about looking for these things in the body is it gets us out of the thinking mind, which can be hard to work through. But if I look at, where do I hold fear in my body? What's this experience of fear in this body, down the neck and lower? And usually we'll find there's physical sensations. They're not comfortable, but neither are they dangerous. They're not dangerous to us. They're just sensations. It could be kind of a softness or a shakiness or something like that, a discomfort in the body or some part of the shoulders. It could be discomfort, but it's not dangerous. The mind is screaming danger at us, right? But when we look at the sensations of the body, we see there's really nothing there that's dangerous. And so as we begin to investigate this way to see, what does this actually feel like? Just the looking itself loosens the hold that these mind states have on us. It loosens the constriction. As we begin to see there's nothing really there, there's nothing tangible there, it begins to loosen and give more space. As it gives more space, we open up again from that space perspective, and our time perspective begins to open up too. So present to what my body is feeling right now, but there's this kind of a peripheral awareness of time being bigger than just this present moment. So this present moment is an aspect, but this time is sort of flowing through that moment. And that bigger time puts things into a better perspective. You can zoom out far enough, regardless of what's going on in the world today, from 50,000 years, what does any of it matter, right? 100,000 years, sometime out in the future, what does anything that's happening in this day and age matter? So at some level, it doesn't matter, right? It's not going to be the end of whatever. As we could begin to come in, we might even be able to say, oh, what about 50 years from now? What's the impact going to be there? Well, that's closer. But still, it's like, it's when we get really close in here to the fear, that's where the problem is. So the more that we can begin to open that up, the less the fear takes over the experience of being who we are, and takes a proper perspective. From that place, instead of being a life preserver that we're grasping to keep us afloat, it actually becomes an island. Our practice becomes an island. It's a solid piece of ground that we live on, regardless of what storms and waves are on the outside of it. Because we begin to see that the suffering and the stress the source of them is not the world around us. It's our taking that in and creating a relationship to it, which is unpleasant. We believe that relationship, we suffer these experiences, and the world collapses around us. So those are wonderful tools. Our mindfulness practice is a wonderful tool to use that way. And then there's other tools that we all know about, like the metta practice. Some people mentioned doing metta practice. I always recommend starting with yourself with metta practice. I know that goes against the mainstream teachings of some people, but you got to start here is my reason for saying that. If you are not at peace, if you are not in love right here with yourself, with your true nature, however could you be that way for the world around you? The example people talk about is on an airplane. They always say, put your own oxygen mask on first, right? They don't say, put the oxygen mask on for benefactor, then put an oxygen mask on for a difficult person in the seat behind who's been kicking your seat, then put it on for all living beings, and then finally come back and put it on that's not the way it's said on the airplane. It's like, put this here first. Breathe. So this is what we're talking about with doing metta for ourselves first. To be able to bring peace, quiet, a sense of stability, a sense of moving away from the rigidity of fixed beliefs into the value that those things represented, to be the peace that you value, to be the connection that you value. And friends, when we are that, when we begin to come from that place, we naturally are that way with others. The heart just opens and we are that way with others. So you'll begin to find, if you can be at peace with things, you'll begin finding yourself offering well-being for everybody else. They don't have to think the way you think. I remember one teacher that I worked with years ago said, can you imagine, he was talking about the difficult people, can you imagine if the difficult people really had all these qualities of loving kindness, if they felt free, happy, and at ease, what would they be like to be around? That'd be wonderful, right? So if they really have that, then yeah, the world would be a much more agreeable place and much more beautiful place. So we generate that in the world around us by who we are. Because when we feel that way in ourselves, we live that way. When we live that way, we touch the lives of the people around us. And then the other piece of it is when you hear something like this, I've had people ask me, well, I'm not going to just roll over and play dead and let the world fall apart around me. We're not advocating that. It's where our behaviors and our actions come from. When you are, when you're caught up in constriction and fear, the place that you tend to act from, the Buddha talked about these different roots of our intentionality. So there's unskillful roots where we act from aversion, we act from greed, and we act from confusion or delusion. So when we're feeling constriction and fear, that's where we're coming from. And just think about that in your own life. If you've acted out of anger, let's say you talk and say things out of anger, what comes out of that? Does good come out of it for you? Does what you really want come out of it? Usually not. Usually the things that come out of our anger, later we wish we could atone for or make amends for. The same is true when we don't understand, when we don't see clearly. And clear seeing is understanding cause and effect. It's knowing that the future moments are influenced by how I live this moment. So as we begin to act more from this spaciousness, from this place where my fear and my constriction have subsided and begin to open up, my heart can begin to open to the skillful roots the Buddha talked about, which is generosity, compassion, and clear seeing, the opposite of the unskillful roots. So when you're acting from a place of generosity, just think of how you feel and how those around you feel when you're coming from that place. Think of how you feel and how people around you feel when you're coming from a place of compassion or from clear seeing. I understand this can lead to that. Therefore, I won't do this. And so from those roots, we can go out and act in the world in a very skillful way. It could be that some of the things you choose to do might actually be the same types of things that you wish to do. For me, I've shared with many of you, one of the things that I found myself acting from is this organization called Braver Angels, which the purpose is to bring people with different views together to talk to each other, to understand each other, not to convince each other who's right, but just to hear each other as people, to see. We can disagree on things and we can still be civil and kind to each other. So for me, that felt very much like a place of clear seeing. This is helpful to the world. So I don't know if I was angry that I would have done that. If I was coming from anger, I think I would have wanted to hit somebody on the head with a hammer probably, So it's a different way of being in the world. So as our practice begins to mature around these types of experiences that happen in our lives, and this is not the last time, friends. This is not the last time you'll have the opportunity, right? These things come up for us. If not in our society, then in our personal lives. We get sick. We have loved ones who get sick or die. We have auto accidents with a deer. We have all manner. We lose jobs. We lose relationships. Time after time, we'll have these opportunities to do this. But when they're here, there's kind of a precious quality to them to really learn in a way that we can't do when all feels like it's going well. So I encourage you to see, can you move your practice from being the life preserver that's just helping you hang on to begin to investigate what's the thing you're hanging on from. What is that? And how much of it really is the world out there, and how much of it is your relationship to that world? How much of it is your thoughts about what's to come, right? The fears. How much of it is you feel the world contracting around you because of what's happened in the last couple of weeks? How much of it is there? And friends, the good thing is if you can begin to see much of this is because of my relationship to it, we have an influence over that. We don't have an influence necessarily on what's happening in the bigger space, maybe a little bit, but not much. We have a lot of influence over what goes on here. So we can use our practice in this way to begin to see if I can soften myself and come to a place of peace in myself, back to the values and away from the fixed view of the beliefs that I have. But what are the things that I really value? Can I live from that space? The more we're able to do that, the more our world opens up, the more we become that which we're seeking, the more we become the peace, the connection, the love in the world, the more we touch the world that way, and our practice and our presence become more of an island in the storm and the high seas than just a life preserver that's holding us till the waves subside by their own.